When you hear of pristine European wilderness, I think it's safe to assume that nearly everyone will think of expansive and dense forests like those of Scandinavia or the eastern part of the continent. However, many of these ancient forests are not actually what the environment in that area should be. Much like in the plains of Africa, where herds of wildebeest, zebra, and buffalo roam the savanna in their millions, up until the recent past, Europe had its own caste of charismatic mammals that would have lived in an open, grassy landscape. And although today you may need to travel to Asia or Africa to go on safari, there's hope that this might not always be the case. In this video, I will talk about the lost Serengeti of Europe, and how maybe it's not very lost at all. A mere 15,000 years ago, not long before humans started developing agriculture, Europe was a completely different landscape to how we know it today. Much of it would have been open grass and scrublands, the songs of skylarks filling the air and vultures circling in the sky. Megaloceros would spar for the right to mate with the largest antlers of any animal, living or extinct. Eurasian leopards and lynx living solitary lives, staying near the trees to ambush an unsuspecting deer or boar. The call of an aurochs bull echoes through the open landscape, warning nearby rivals of his strength to protect his harem of females. Countless herds of wisent, red deer and wild horses would feed on the bountiful grasses, and prides of lions patrolled their expansive territories in search of prey or to scare off nearby packs of wolves. All the while, massive mammoth, woolly rhinoceros and steppe bison could be seen on the horizon. If you were to travel 15,000 years back in time, which sounds like ages ago, but is the blink of an eye for nature and evolution, the Eurasian continent would not be very different to the exciting and diverse savannas of Africa today, where a myriad of large, charismatic mammals live in an open landscape instead of the dense and often quiet forests that carpet Europe's remaining wilderness in modern times. So how come no European countries have their own versions of the Serengeti or Kruger National Parks? What happened to these once mighty and abundant animals? Well, like in most of the world at the end of the Pleistocene period, the extinction of European mammals and the loss of savanna-like ecosystems would be, for the most part, at the hands of humans, who would continue to develop increasingly effective weapons and an exponentially growing population. By 10,000 years ago, 45% of all megafauna, or animals weighing over 50 kilograms, would disappear from the continent. Mammoth, rhinoceros, steppe bison, megaloceros, Eurasian lions, hyenas, cave bears, leopards would no longer roam the plains or wander the forests. The aurochs, wisent, and wild horses that were once so numerous were reduced to tiny fractions of their population, where they would eventually also go extinct over the last few centuries. And most of the continent's remaining top predators, such as wolf, bear, wolverine, and lynx, would be killed off for the safety of human livestock or for sport, very few of them surviving into the modern age. The unfortunate loss of most of the megafauna at the hands of our species would mark the end of an era for Europe. For the last 15 million years, there was a balance between open grasslands and the expansion of forests. A balance that was kept by the intimate relations between the native herbivores, plants, predators, and scavengers. When these intricate webs of life became disturbed, the balance that was once kept for so long fell apart, changing the land from productive and open woodlands to dense, dark, and comparatively poor, closed canopy forests. Now, although it's sad that you won't spot a rhinoceros on your road trip to Paris, there is still hope for the Europe of the past. It may be missing many of the main characters of its prehistory, but the land has a memory, and it still remembers what it once was. And with a little help, the cogs of nature can begin to turn once again, rapidly transforming it into a former glory. In the 1970s, ecologists were beginning to acknowledge the importance of the recently extinct megafauna of the continent. And in the 80s, they began to try and resurrect the Europe of the past. One of the most numerous megafauna of recent history was the wild horse. They had roamed through enormous swathes of the Eurasian landmass, from Mongolia to the British Isles. As they numbered in their millions, they would have been extremely influential and important for their ecosystems. Horses are primarily grazing herbivores, meaning they eat mostly grasses, herbs, and weeds. As they consume massive amounts of vegetation, up to 15 kilograms every day, they cut down on the fast-growing plants that would otherwise suffocate their neighbors of light. They basically act like biological lawnmowers, and this has a cascading effect on the native fauna and flora. For example, many species of native flowering plants have become dependent on this grazing behavior. It ensures that every spring they have enough light to blossom, which then supports a diverse array of pollinating insects, attracting insect-eating birds, and then those birds' predators. The simple presence of the horses and the way that they eat allows for more complex food webs in their environment. Dutch ecologist Frans Vera was formulating a theory that Europe's natural state of ecology was that of open landscapes maintained by large herbivores, instead of the dense forests that cover much of it today. And in 1983, Vera was able to put his theory to test. A chunk of land had recently been drained from the inland sea that borders the northern provinces of the Netherlands. And when nature started to rapidly colonize it, Vera jumped in to try his ecological experiment. He knew that for millions of years, the local plants and animals evolved to depend on the open environment that large herbivores would engineer. And with this knowledge, he aimed to create a natural area that would support more biodiversity by restoring missing links in the local food chain. Unless you haven't been to Europe, you'd know that you don't usually bump into a herd of wild horses. And that's because, sadly, in the late 19th century, the last ones would go extinct in the eastern corners of the continent. So, to restore missing natural processes, Vera decided to introduce a replacement for fully wild equines into the natural park they were creating. The Konik is a Polish breed of domestic horse, and were once believed to be the descendants of the wild horses that existed across the continent. though this idea is a bit controversial and has been mostly proven inaccurate. Regardless of whether conics are truly wild, their release into the Oostvaardersplassen had a domino effect on the local ecology. The open grasslands they maintained through their extensive feeding supported a greater diversity of plants and animals that require a grassy environment. In the spring, far more flowers bloom than in a dark forest. Many species of grass-eating goose started living in the area, which then attracted their predators such as white-tailed eagles and red foxes. The grasslands also favored the red and roe deer that still lived in the country, allowing their numbers to explode as well. Conic horses made the environment return to a more natural state, one that relies on large herbivores that cut down on fast-growing plants. And the success at the Oostvaardersplassen inspired conservationists all over the world to do the same. For example, throughout the Netherlands, it became common practice to integrate these horses into nature reserves. Where I live, many herds of these horses have been released into the local dunes, and this was done so to create more diverse landscapes and house a greater variety of species.
They may at first look like a regular horse breed, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they are behaving a lot like their ancient ancestors did for millions of years across the plains of Europe.
The conic horses live in the dunes throughout the year, and if you know how to follow trails of poop and tracks, you can find them yourself. These areas always have far more flowers, birds, and insects than in other parts of the city, and make it a really important place for people to walk through, unwind, and admire nature.
And you can't help but feel like you are in true wilderness when you come across the herd in the middle of this beautiful open bushland that they have pioneered themselves. I think it's truly amazing that we're able to get these sort of experiences 20 minutes away from the center of a busy city.
The release of conic horses at the Oostvaardersplassen is often regarded as the birth of the modern rewilding movement. Rewilding is a developing and promising conservation technique that aims to restore broken relationships in nature by the reintroduction of locally extinct species. It's an incredibly exciting concept that I will frequently talk about on this channel. Some rewilding projects have even begun to try and bring back one of the most iconic native megafauna of Europe. In the same way Africa and Asia have their own species of buffalo, Europe had its own large bovine that would have numbered in their millions. The aurochs is the wild ancestor of modern cattle. Bos primigenius evolved in the subcontinent of India 2 million years ago, and would eventually spread through all over Northern Asia, into the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. Only 10,000 years ago, some populations of the aurochs would become domesticated by us Homo sapiens, who would eventually use their milk and flesh to create McFlurries, burgers, and an innumerable number of products. However, many of the wild ancestors to our beloved cattle would persist well into recent history. Julius Caesar would write of their speed and strength, and Greek naturalists would document them in their historic accounts. The last wild aurochs would die in the forests of Poland in 1627. Although it's sad that Europe lost its equivalent of a buffalo, our modern cattle share over 99.7% of their DNA with these wild animals. And with a little selective breeding and de-domestication, we have begun to piece together the mighty aurochs. Stichting Taurus, a conservation group from the Netherlands, saw the benefits of the rewilding of large herbivores at the Oostvaardersplassen, and took it as inspiration for another ambitious project. In 2008, they launched the Taurus program, which set out to develop a breed of cattle that closely resembles the behavior and appearance of the extinct aurochs. And after just a few generations of selective breeding, this is currently what the Taurus looks like. It is far from the same size as the aurochs, and it doesn't really have the right horns and physical proportions yet. But they have already begun to behave in similar ways to their extinct ancestor, and their impact on the local ecology is very clear. Their large size and even larger appetites allows them to eat tougher, woody plants like young trees. Plants which other animals like horses and deer would not really go for, and this prevents the expansion of dense forests that would otherwise suffocate the ground of light. But the positive effects that they have on the environment doesn't stop there. Their dung is a superfood for local plants and fungi, also transporting the seeds and spores of hundreds of species. The paths that they create as they bulldoze through the vegetation are used as highways by all sorts of animals, helping them access places to feed and drink. The exposed ground that they leave behind after taking a dust bath serves as a perfect sunning spot for reptiles and insects. And Taurus can also serve as a vital source of nutrition for local predators and scavengers, supporting more complex food webs. Taurus cattle are now being released all over the continent for the aurochs effect that they have on the area, where there's a sudden explosion in the diversity and numbers of plants and animals. As we learn more about the dynamics between living beings and how their relationships shape the environment, it is becoming increasingly clear that European wilderness is missing the key large herbivores that were once so abundant. And although its nature will unfortunately never be what it once was, where rhinoceros, lions, and mammoth could roam the steppe and woodlands, the addition of locally extinct species such as horses and aurochs allow for missing natural processes to take place once again, causing a cascade of reactions which returns the land to a more natural state of ecology. These exciting rewilding projects are becoming more and more common throughout Europe, where animals big and small, from voles and dung beetles to wisent and lynx, are being released all over the continent. And with continued support and collaboration, in the near future we could have expansive reserves where large influential mammals like Taurus, wisent, horse and deer shape their environment into a diverse mosaic of grasses, shrubs and trees, where they serve as a source of food for predators like wolves, bears and lynx, and support a complex and intimately connected web of life. By helping nature take control of the natural processes that once existed for millions of years, we are getting ever so close to reviving the lost Serengeti of Europe. And soon, we might not need to travel so far to go on safari. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a little bit about ecology and the exciting rewilding that's taking over the world. I'll be sure to make a more detailed video on the prehistory of Europe in the near future. If you think this video deserves it, leave a like and consider subscribing to be up to date with my future content. You're also welcome to leave a comment and give suggestions on what you would like for me to cover in future videos. Until then, touch grass, hug your parents, and I'll see you on the next one.